Okay, it's now recording. I just talked for a while and discovered that it wasn't recording. This is the first broadcast, and my name's John Woodward. Um, about, well, it's now 12 years ago, I started a website site called the People's Bank Party. Um, Nothing ever came of the big People's Bank Party. Basically, it doesn't exist. Although the website's still called that principally because I haven't quite worked out how to change the web address, but I intend to do that. Now the website, if you look at it, is End Debt Slavery, John Woodward for the Senate. I've decided that I'm more likely to be able to get 100 people to nominate me to run for the Senate than I am to get 500 people to join a political party. So most people, I think, will just, let you have a run for the Senate, but they won't necessarily be prepared to join a political party. So that's the way I'm going to go. Now, the reason I want to run is partly because I want to do something useful with my life before I'm dead. And I've discovered about 15 years ago that the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States was privately owned, and that started me on a quest which led me to realise that the whole entire financial system of the world is one great big scam, and that the vast majority of humanity are basically being farmed like cattle. We're as debt slaves to enrich a tiny elite of bankers, um, and it's got to end because it's actually going to end up in destroying humanity. What's happening now is they didn't foresee the internet, and a lot of people are finding out about this situation, and they are actually trying to start a third world war, which of course will go nuclear, and that could be the end of humanity. But what we need to do is change things in a peaceful fashion. Unfortunately, our governments of most countries, and particularly in the West, are absolute puppets of these bankers. The Australian government in particular, or not in particular, but the Australian government serves the interest of the bankers, not the interests of the people. The power of the bankers and their ability to control our government and to farm us like cattle comes from their power to issue the money supply. Most people think that the money supply is issued by the government. In fact, the government issues about less than 3% of the money supply in the form of currency. The balance of the money supply is issued by private banks as debt. They create it out of thin air. The principal mechanism used to do this is the fractional reserve banking system, which is a system which grew out of a fraud which was practiced, in the Middle Ages, in England and other places, of course. But what happened was people would lodge their gold was money, and people would lodge their gold with a goldsmith. He would give them a paper receipt for it, a gold receipt. When people did a transaction, often instead of going back and collecting their gold to do the transaction, they would simply hand over that gold receipt, so that the gold receipts became a form of money as opposed to the gold. When the goldsmiths realised that people rarely came back to collect their gold but just traded with the gold receipts, they started handing out more gold receipts than they had gold, probably 10 times as many gold receipts as the amount of gold they had. And people use those gold receipts as money. That's where fractional reserve banking comes from. It's a fraud, and it's the basis of our banking system at the moment, which remains a fraud. The government has the power under the Constitution to issue the money supply and to control banking in all its aspects, but it doesn't do so. They just act as the puppets of the bankers, totally against the interests of the people, and by that I mean 99.9% of the people, or at least 90, certainly more than 99% of the people. Even well-to-do people would be better off in a system where this didn't pertain. Of course, our assets. Anyway, I'm going off the track with that. But anyway, this was just my first test at a recording, and I just want to have a listen to this and see how it comes across. So I'll see you next week, and hopefully I'll be broadcasting before too long, because I'm going to run for the Senate, and I haven't got the money, and no party's going to endorse me, because the major parties and I are purely there to make us think that we have a choice. There is no choice. People are waking up to that, but then they come up with a third party, like Pauline Hanson, or Clive Palmer. And I think these parties, because, Clive, he certainly comes across as, oh yes, I'm for the people, but he just blathers. His principal policy is he's going to postpone taxation on corporations till the end of the year. But what's going to happen then? Okay, the government's just going to have a shortage, so they'll borrow more money to get them through to the end of the year. It means nothing. And of course, when the government borrows money, it's got to raise that in taxes from the people. So what? The tax is postponed for a short time. It's a complete Mickey Mouse policy. So I don't think he's serious at all. I actually think that a lot of people are getting disaffected with the major parties, and so the bankers behind the scenes, the men behind the curtain, are they put up people like Clive Palmer to soak up the disaffected. People say, oh, this liberal Labor two-party tyranny is no good. We're going to go for a third party, but unfortunately that third party is just going to give them more of the same. So that's why I'm in there. I make no bones about it. The debt-based monetary system is the source of all evil in the world. We actually could have heaven on earth in Australia, a country with such a small population and such clever people and such huge resources. If we ran this country for the benefit of the Australian people, we could have heaven on earth, and we could also at the same time do a heck of a lot to help our fellow men in less fortunate countries than ours. Anyway, I'm going to sign off now. I hope to see you in a genuine broadcast before too long. Okay, and I'll hopefully get to the stage where I can actually talk about particular events and policies and so on and so forth. This is just a test to see how I come across and get used to talking. Okay, I'll see you next week. Bye bye.